Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to the Rangers Rabble afternoon show. My name's Brian. I am in the hot seat today, as Martin maybe have told you this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined by Ash this afternoon. Ash, how are we?
Very well, thank you. The sun is beating through the window here in bonnie Edinburgh, and I hear that we've got a heat wave at the weekend, which will be fun for about 1 hour until everyone hides indoors and complains that we can't handle this heat in Scotland. So very much looking forward to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, yeah. We moan when it's cold, but then we also moan when it's hot, don't we?
Oh, it's just a Scottish thing, really, isn't it? We're never happy and we're quite comfortable to be that way. But no, it is nice. The thought of sun is nice until you're actually in it for a prolonged period. And then suddenly it becomes a little bit less enjoyable. But I'll not wish rain on us yet.
No, no, no. And Lyndon's totally agreeing with you. He's in Edinburgh and he says it's roasting. So there we go. There we go. Half shift, yeah, very good, very good. Yes, well, I was early today, so none of that. That was a slight technical hitch last night, and I'm blaming technology on that. Nothing to do with us. But we are here, of course, to speak about Rangers and all things Rangers. And Ash, as I just said to you before we started, seems to be wingers is the flavour of the day.
And like I mentioned, we would need about 6 weeks worth of research to be able to keep up with all of the wingers that have been thrown at us in terms of links over the last 24 hours. But it's reassuring because I think, we didn't need to see Sunday to know that we definitely need better wing options in the first team. I think last season proved that, but Sunday was just a slight insight into, the kind of season we could look forward to if we go ahead with the option. So delighted that Martin and his team are looking at it. And it sounds as though there's a few that are very close to coming through the door, which would be good.
Well, absolutely. And we'll speak about one that's obviously the most sort of spoke about recently is Gassama from Sheffield Wednesday. I believe it's seemingly meant to be in around about the 2.5 million range. And if reports are to be believed, he's already at St George's Park with the squad training. So it's almost a case of they're waiting for everything to get sort of the cross the I's and dot the T's.
Yeah, I mean, if those reports are true, you would expect that probably the contract's been signed because I doubt they'd want to risk him in a training match or any sort of training activity and something potentially go wrong. So I understand, I think Sheffield Wednesday were down at St George's Park doing some pre-season preparation themselves. So that's a pretty easy transition for him to move from one dressing room to the other. But no, I mean, he's one that I'm very excited about. I mean, I've done the obligatory YouTube highlights, as I'm sure most people watching this have done. And he just ticks all of the boxes for me. Very pacey, very comfortable, kind of ball carrier, bringing the ball forward, can go outside a man. But also, what I really enjoyed was he seems very comfortable to come inside. Now, we saw Czerny do that last season to very good effect. But my criticism of Czerny, and it was hard to criticise him because he was one of the few lights last season, but he was quite one dimensional. I felt he was never going to go on the outside of a defender. And I think defenders quickly worked that out and just nullified the space inside. So Gassama seems as though he's comfortable either way. And I think will be a real upgrade on that left wing. I think what will be interesting is I think predominantly he is a left winger, but he has played quite a lot of games at right wing and even at attacking midfield position. So it will be really interesting to see what Martin does with him, whether he is going to be an out and out left winger or whether he's going to utilise him across the front three, which again gives us options and can only be a positive thing.
Absolutely. And as Paul's just pointed out there, it's apparently a 4-year deal. So they obviously are quite confident this lad's going to come in, make a difference, and then as the player trading model will hopefully be kicking on from then, be able to move him on.
Yeah, I mean, I think he started his career out at PSG, and I think he might have actually made a first team appearance for them, which is no mean feat given the riches that they have at their disposal. And then obviously he's gone into the championship and done really well. So he's at an age profile where I think we go in, we get him early. There's still a bit of development to do there, but from everything I've read from the Wednesday fans, it seems as though he's the kind of player that will get us off our seats. And if we have been able to get him in for 2.5 million, I think that's a pretty good deal. I know that Southampton were linked with him sort of at the tail end of last season. Now, obviously, they were going down from the Premier League, but very much looking to bounce back first time. So it's very reassuring that they felt he is a top half championship player that can help them compete for promotion. So it might be that Sheffield Wednesday's problems off the field, sadly, have maybe helped that transfer happen. Of course, we feel for the Wednesday fans, but from a Rangers perspective, it could be a really, really good bit of business.
Yeah, I mean, I believe from all reports anyway, the Sheffield Wednesday fans, that was the guy they didn't want to lose. This was the guy they sort of hung their shirt on, wasn't it? Because he was the one that was the sort of the bright spark in the team, if you want to call it that. He was the one that was getting them off their seats and making things happen. So that gives you a little bit of reassurance as well, doesn't it? That the club that he's leaving didn't want him to go.
And I think, likewise, like Manny Fernandez, we had the opposite kind of feedback on him that, we weren't particularly, the fans were quite happy to see him out the door. So you kind of always take it with a pinch of salt. But you're absolutely spot on. I think when fans are openly on social media saying, look after him, enjoy him, he's not going to be in Scotland for long if he keeps progressing the way that we think we can, it's definitely positive. And like I say, it's just a shame for the Wednesday fans who've had a pretty horrible summer, and it doesn't look as though things are going to get better looking ahead to next season. But sadly, their loss is our gain, and we kind of have to make the most of that opportunity. It also throws up the question, would we have had the chance to get them, if Wednesday weren't in the difficulty that they were in? And I guess we'll never know that, but that's something that I think could be the case.
I mean, Charles, come on, do better, will you? Gassama to the left, me, the doozy to the right. Here I am stuck in the middle with you. I mean, gee whiz.
Just to come off the cuff, Charles, that is impressive. That is very impressive. I'm not going to sing it, though. I'm not going to sing it. Brian, you might want to give it a go, but not for me.
No, nobody needs to hear my dulcet tones. Absolutely not. Good point here from John B. Holt. I know, like many, I've said we can't replace an entire team in one window, but I suspect the new owners have no such inhibitions. I think they're going to. I genuinely do think they'll go all out this summer to try and get as many as they can within price ranges and wage ranges and stuff like that. But I don't think that this board, certainly the way that Kavanagh and them were speaking, straight after the EGM, for example, I just don't think they're going to rest in their laurels, these guys, are they?
No, and I think a few weeks ago we were all sort of sitting on our hands thinking, when is this transfer revolution going to start? Because it was clear to everyone that we did need not only a lot of incomings, but we need to remove some of the existing squad. Now, that's still up in the air. I still think we've got a lot of work to do there. But I think, from the board's point of view and from the likes of Thelwell, etc., they've clearly had targets in mind, and they've just been methodically, perhaps waiting for people to come back from holidays, etc., clubs to be back available and to start trying to make these signings. But the other carrot to remember for us is that if we win the league this season, I believe we'll qualify almost guaranteed into the Champions League proper because of our coefficient. Now that's a huge financial incentive for club and for the owners. Is it worth fronting up some of the investment now to give us that opportunity to help close the gap financially on Celtic? So A, there's a necessity because the squad isn't good enough, but B, I think they're maybe looking a bit further ahead and saying the league is potentially there for us if we can make the right signings in the right positions.
Speculating to accumulate, pretty much, isn't it? They're going to throw, I wouldn't say throw all their eggs in one basket, because that's not what I think they would like. But as you say, if they do go all out this summer, the carrot is at the end, isn't it? The Champions League qualifications there for the taking, isn't it?
It is, and it's also a case of, this squad, when they come together this season, aren't going to be as good as they will be next season, because obviously, the more you play together, the more you develop. So if they can target these signings early on, get them in the door, let's hope we have a successful year this year. But it means that when we get to next summer, we might just have to refine the squad rather than rip it up and start again, which, if we're honest, we've had to do pretty much every summer for the last few years. It seems as though we're having a massive turnover, and that really isn't conducive to success. So I'm quite comfortable if we are going to go heavy in the transfer window this summer. I think it's necessary, but the challenge will now be moving out those players that are, making the squad quite bloated. And also, you don't really want to keep people unhappy in and around a new squad that you're trying to kind of shape in terms of character and, culture, etc. So that's, for me, once we get these signings in the door, it'll be about how quickly can we move these other players out.
Absolutely. And just sort of following on from what you said about, or what we discussed about Rangers and Sheffield Wednesday, as Wolf's just pointing out, they're both at St George's this week. Seems to be a nice bonus for us with this one. Yeah, I mean, it does seem very convenient, Ash, that they're both at St George's training. I dare say there's maybe a hint of an accident or a coincidence in there, but I don't believe in coincidences.
Oh, I wonder if maybe we've not heard that link before because Rangers have thought we'll save ourselves a job and we'll just nip next door and have a chat with the Sheffield Wednesday hierarchy and get it all sorted pretty quick. Of course, I jest with that, but no, you're right. I think maybe it's just a case of he's there, get him integrated to the squad really quickly because that was one concern I had about the kind of slow start to the transfer movement was that you miss this really crucial period of pre-season where not only is Martin getting across his ideas about how he wants the team to play and the base layer of fitness that we know is really important. But it's also about building that relationship with your teammates and that camaraderie when the chips are down, are you all going to fight for each other? So as many as we can integrate into the St George's camp, the better. And from my understanding, there's quite a few teams down there this week. So if any sort of online investigators want to go and have a look at the list of teams, we can maybe identify a few other players that we might be linked with over the next 24 hours.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Multiple Man says, absolutely true. Every signing comes with a question mark. Can they handle the weight of the expectation that comes with our shirt? And yeah, there's been bigger and better players came to our club in the past, Ash, as you know, and have failed miserably. The expectation was either, just far too much for them. And even it didn't matter how big a sort of caliber of player they were or personality they were, they just couldn't handle it, could they?
No, and I think that's a really fair point, Multiple Man. I mean, I'm not suggesting that Dowell is a high quality player, not to be rude to the boy, but he came in with a decent reputation and went away to Birmingham, did excellently, but has never really kicked the ball for Rangers. So for some players, the jersey is just too heavy. I think that's true. And with all the signings we bring in, it seems as though the profile generally has been quite young. So you don't know how they're going to adapt to the demands of the club. But that's why I think it's important you have the likes of, Rothwell there with a bit of experience. You've got Cody potentially if that happens. You do also have the likes of Tav and Butland who are experienced. So you hope that they'll help integrate the players into the squad. But no, until the season kicks off and the pressure's on, you're right. All of this is said with the caveat they're good players, but can they hack playing at Ibrox and can they hack the demands?
Absolutely. This is a good point from Wolf. I'm still concerned we don't have a game in front of a crowd before the European qualifier. I must admit, when the sort of pre-season fixtures came out, when obviously the draw came out for the Champions League, I must admit I sort of raised an eyebrow when the Bruges game was the only one that was earmarked before the qualifier. I was genuinely expecting us to at least have one, maybe two more squeezed in there if we could. So basically, there's going to be some guys who haven't played in front of the Rangers crowd before, possibly pitching up at Ibrox and playing. Is that a concern?
I think it's fair to be concerned about that. A full Ibrox when it's on your side, there's literally no other stadium like it in the world. I would, hedge my bets on. But obviously, when things aren't going well, it can be really, really difficult. So I get that. I suppose the only thing I would say is a friendly doesn't really replicate a European night. So in some ways, not having a friendly capacity crowd, having much experience of that, I don't think will make too much of a difference. I would probably be more concerned just about the general lack of match sharpness potentially that our team will have. Because from my understanding, Parath and Icos are playing quite a number of friendlies before we play. So it
Yes.
seems as though they might be more ready. That being said, sounds as though we've got a couple of games lined up at St George's this week against some of those teams that are also preparing there. And I would imagine there'll be something behind closed doors at Auchenhowie next week before we actually get to the qualifier. But no, it is quite a strange start to the pre-season because normally we've got quite a few games kind of lined up. And I don't know whether that's been deliberate, as in Martin's deliberately wanted either more time on the training pitch or he wants to kind of keep his team away from the spotlight for whatever reason, or whether it's just been a case of we were quite late to make the appointment of Martin and maybe our options for some pre-season friendlies evaporated. I don't know. But I would agree it's unusual. I would have preferred to have a few more games live in front of fans than we've currently got set up at the moment.
Absolutely. And I suppose I'll bring up Eddie's point on Facebook. Hi there. How many more players would you sign? Now, I dare say this would very much sort of you would almost it's a difficult question to ask this one purely because you don't know how many are going to leave, are you? I think it depends how many leave as to how many more are going to come in, isn't it?
I mean, if you take that, because you're right, we can't carry 40 players into next season. That would be a disaster. We don't want to be like Chelsea and having to build an extension onto the dressing room. That's not an ideal way to invest money. But if you take if you assume that players are going to move out, I guess if you methodically kind of work through the squad, we definitely need a right winger, definitely need a left winger. I think we definitely need another striking option just to mix up that front line. I assume that Igaman or Dessers or both are going to go. I still think we need one of the central defenders that have been mooted to come in. You know, we've had Cody and the Wolves boy as well have been linked, and apparently that's done, but nothing's actually been signed, sealed, and delivered yet, or certainly been announced to the public. So I still think we're 4 or 5 first team players away from being ready to compete next season domestically. So it sounds as though they're not resting on their laurels and there's a lots of irons in the fire. But the quicker we get these guys in, the quicker that they're going to be ready for Panathinaikos. Because at the moment, I'm a little bit nervous about going into that game with the current squad that we've got.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, it's Wolf's just saying we've got a game against Deferment in the training centre, but obviously that's behind closed doors. Nobody will see it. So, you know, it's, yeah, I get there's a game, but I'd have much preferred a game with a crowd. So at least some of the new players could get used to that and, you know, not sort of be, well, let's be honest, it's going to be an excellent atmosphere at home to Panathinaikos at the start of the game. And I don't want that atmosphere to spook the match because that can happen to some players. They get a bit surprised by how loud and how noisy it is.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And we're not going to know until they actually play. But I suppose the crowd is going to be with them. You know, I know we had the boos at halftime, which I would like to think were mostly tongue in cheek rather than actually seriously people being angry. But you know, everyone in that stadium on the 22nd is going to be with the players, with the squad. I do think that the likes of Martin, etc., they've obviously played at Ibrox before. He will understand the character it takes for these guys to be Rangers players. It sounds as though, you know, I've mentioned culture before became quite a buzzword when Martin was appointed. I think they understand that only certain types of players can handle the pressure of playing for Rangers. So I'd like to think that's been quite a strong part of the recruitment process. Doesn't mean that guys maybe won't freeze now and then. I don't think that they'll be bringing anyone to the club that they don't think can handle that type of pressure or that kind of crowd. And as I say, there'll be goodwill in the stadium on the 22nd. So I don't really worry too much about that. The disaster would be if we got off to a bad start, of course. Then it might be interesting, but we're all very much hoping that won't be the case.
Yes. And Dale, I think I can comfortably say on behalf of everybody, this is certainly not going to happen, or it better not happen. I think that, you know, that there's no way that can happen, Ash, is there?
I mean, that would make me very, very sad. I have to say that would not be a happy moment for me. Didn't particularly love him when he was here, if I'm being honest, and I certainly don't like the way that he behaved and talked about the club, him and his dad, when he left. So, yeah, you would have to convince me a lot that that was a good idea for me to accept Josh Windass back at Rangers.
Absolutely. Mark Doyce coming in with a comment. Robin Propper will probably go when we get another centre half, but rumours 2020 can't afford his wages. Old club Besiktas offer 2 million for Redvan. Rangers want more money. Owen Bet would be a good left back. Absolutely. I think it just hasn't worked out for Redvan, has it? It's just been he's never been able to get a consistent run of games. He's always one tackle away from an injury, as far as I'm concerned. Ash, he's every time he goes into a tackle, I'm like, oh no, I'm always wincing because I'm expecting to come out, injured. So, is Redvan's Rangers career over?
And again, I'm being quite hard and quite harsh here, but I hope so. I don't think I think when he came in, he showed a lot of promise. And I do think there are certain aspects of his game, when he plays well, he generally plays really well. But when he's poor, he's not just a 7 out of 10, he's like a 4 out of 10. He actually kind of hurts the team. And I mean, even on Sunday, I know it was a friendly, so you can't place too much stock, but it was kind of a flashback to what I've seen last season. His ball distribution is so poor. Simple passes, he hits 20 yards out the park. And it's not just about the frustration of losing the ball. It's just a bit of a momentum killer. Everyone kind of deflates when that kind of stuff happens. And I do think Redvan is really guilty of that. I also think as well, probably from his point of view, he needs to have a fresh start because he's never, as I say, hit the heights that we expected of him at Rangers. Jeffy seems to be, a player that we're going to invest time in. But I would agree, sorry, I've lost the previous person's name, but I would agree that we do need another left back, and someone like Owen Beck, if he's still available for me, would be fantastic to compete with Jeffy. But I think Redvan, if you could get a couple of million for him, that would be pretty good business for Rangers at this stage.
Absolutely. And the other two wingers that we were linked with is, I believe, Tiero Balo, and I believe was it Wolfsberger in Austria that he's playing at, Ash? Don't know an awful lot about know an awful lot about this lad. I believe it's a name that's just came out of nowhere. But another one of these young guys who's 23. So in some respects, I'm quite glad we're looking at this sort of market, because I think the Austrian market, Austria's obviously a very good team internationally. So they're obviously a country on the up. So I would, Austria, Sturm Graz, all those teams, I think Grasshoppers of Zurich over the years, young boys, they've all sort of performed well in the European stage. So it's nice to see the nets going further than the UK.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I'm like you, I don't know much about Balo, if that's how you pronounce his name, but I think he got his full Austrian cap last season. So again, Austria is a very decent international team. I think anybody getting cap for them, got to be a decent player. I think he got his opportunity or got the chance to move to Chelsea. Understandably, like about 10,000 other players that go to Chelsea as a kind of youth player, it didn't quite work out for him, but he's gone and he's forged himself a career in Austria. And I think his numbers last year actually were pretty strong. I don't know. I don't pretend to watch the Austrian league, so I don't know how similar it is to the SPFL, but certainly his numbers were good, goals and assists, very, very reasonable numbers there. And the fact, as I say, he got his international call-up would suggest that there's a player in there. It'll just be interesting to see if he's a real link, or whether it's just, the media have realised that we're looking at wingers and they're now just, throwing names at the wall and hoping one of them stick. I think Gassama looks good. The rest I'm not that sure about.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, I'll say it, yes. Edozie, Fan Derby Dozie, there you go. This is a guy that's getting linked quite heavily. This is a pricey one though, Ash, isn't it? It's a heavy price tag, and I'm not quite sure we're going to spend this sort of money on Edozie, who's, I'm not going to say he's untested, because I believe he plays in the Championship, is it?
Yeah, so I think he had a loan spell at Anderlecht last season, but he is contracted to Southampton, and I believe may have played under Russell Martin. So again, that you do wonder, is that a legitimate transfer? From memory, we might have been linked with him before, and it might have been one a few years ago that we almost got over the line. On the basis he's been out on loan, perhaps Southampton are ready to play ball with him. But I do think when you're signing from the top half of the Championship or even the Premier League, there is a premium that comes with that. So it would the numbers would have to be right, I think. I see that Paul's suggesting that a loan might be a good option, and I think that's a very fair point. Maybe you try before you buy if teams are willing to do that. But again, I mean, it's good to see that we're looking at wingers, because it is certainly something that we need to deal with over the next couple of weeks.
And speaking of wingers, one of our very own, if we bring in these two wingers, does that restrict Finley Curtis' chance of getting game time? Obviously, Finley did extremely well at the weekend. Man of the match performance. Yeah, I mean, I dare say, Ash, if you bring two wingers in, you're going to play them, aren't you? And that won't do Finley's chances any favours, will it?
No, and actually Willie and Martin had a really interesting conversation yesterday on the Rabble, where Willie kind of shared his insight around a bit of a dereliction of duty from Rangers, if we're being honest, around keeping some of these young talented Scots players in and around the squad just to fill up quotas for European football. And it's a really good point, because I do think we've probably stunted the growth of a lot of players by doing that. So that's something that we have to wear, as well as players not maybe reaching their potential. We play quite a big part in that. So Finley Curtis is someone who at every level before professional level where he's just kind of reached now, has excelled. He's scored goals. He's been very, very effective. And I think, I thought Paul was going to say put Finley Curtis on loan, because that might be something that I would be quite open to. What I don't want is Finley Curtis to just be kept on the books at Rangers for a couple of years to sit on the bench in Europa League games. He needs to be, for me, one of 4 or 5 wing options that gets legitimate minutes. I'm talking, starts in some domestic games at home, maybe after a European game, to give some of the more experienced players a rest, or a player that comes on, away from home for the last 25, 30 minutes consistently to get some experience. I think if that's not the plan for him, we owe it to him to loan him out, give him a chance to play some first team football, because I do think he's got a chance of making it. I've seen a lot of qualities in him. And I think on Sunday, the way he took his goal, just so nonchalant that late in the game, the only player to play the 90 minutes, I think is very impressive. And he impressed me last year against Aberdeen as well when he was played further forward. So,
Yes.
yeah, he's one I think that we've got to look after. Let's learn our mistakes from previous youth players and let's give him a chance to actually make it, because I'd love to see him be successful at Rangers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the links obviously at the top end of the pitch don't seem to stop either. Luke de Jong, Vardy still keep getting mentioned. As I said the other day, I think if you've been hearing names for a long time or getting linked with Rangers for a decent while, I believe there's a good chance they're not on the list of players that were wanting, because obviously Martin came in quite late. So anybody before Martin that was linked, I'm tended to sort of think that they're not going to be here, because look at the Rothwell signing. That was a name that was, I think it was 28, 48 hours before he signed, and he was in the building. So I just don't think guys that were linked before Martin are going to be here, are they?
No, because it does seem as though the paper was ripped up and started again when Purdy and Thelwell joined. I think that's clear with the likes of, forget the boy's name, the boy that went to Hibs that we were apparently looking at, Mulligan, I think it was.
Mulligan, yes.
And Beck, it seemed as though he was quite a strong contender, but that's kind of quieting down a little bit. So, no, I do think that if we hear about it for weeks and weeks in advance, it's probably not actually going to happen. The De Jong one's interesting. I'll be honest, I've kind of flipped and flopped on that. I wasn't that excited about it. I thought, we've done this before. We've signed an older, experienced player. What's he got left in the tank? And then I actually started to look into it a little bit, and he would be one that I think would be quite interesting. I think his experience, the fact that he's been part of successful title-winning seasons at PSV, and he did cause us quite a lot of problems every time that seems every year we play them in the Champions League qualifiers. So, De Jong and Vardy, I wouldn't be against it if the money was right, as long as perhaps we bring, if that's to support the likes of Igaman, then I'm okay with that. If Igaman moves on, I'd want to see us bring somebody a little bit younger in as well, perhaps the Israeli boy. Turgeman, I think, would be a good signing. So I'd like to see us make some changes in the front line, because I don't want to go in with the same 3 I think we had last year. That would be my preference.
Yes, and Paul, I've not heard this one. We're linked with an Italian striker from Como. No thanks. 1 goal, no thanks. Well, yeah, that's enough for me. 1 goal is not enough, but I've not heard the name, so that I'll leave. But Sakai was the other one that we were going to speak about, Ash, the boy from Crystal Palace. Now, again, this is a hefty fee, and I just don't see that sort of fee getting spent. Do you?
No, I think 10 million might have been what I read somewhere. And this is the guy, obviously, was in the Championship last year, I think, with Sheffield United. It sounds as though there's a few kind of higher Championship clubs sniffing around him, because I think he did reasonably well there. But I would be quite shocked if Rangers were to go and invest £10 million on one player. I heard Martin and a few others talking about, can we do that now? I think possibly we can, but I think there's too much surgery needed around the rest of the squad. And I think there's probably, you'd get a couple of players for that would really change the dynamic of the team. So I would be more minded to spend that there. I would also think, if the boy's been at Crystal Palace for a few years, the wages probably are going to be quite significant as well. And we've obviously made quite an effort to cull the wage bill and get value for money. So if he comes, I'll fully support him, but I probably aren't that excited about that link just based on the finances I think that would be involved.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I just don't think we're going to be in that sort of market for, let's be honest, if you're spending that sort of money, Ash, for me, he is almost pretty much a complete player. He's the finished article. And I don't think Sakai is anywhere near a finished article. So I think this is just typical English media just trying to hype up somebody to get interest. I think that's purely what it is. Thank you very much, Charles. Much appreciated. It's refreshing to see Bryan and Ash rather than Martin. Well, thank you very much, Charles. Much appreciated. I believe
I'm just waiting. Sorry, Brian. I'm just waiting for Martin to jump in there and say
yes.
something. But he's obviously not watching or not available because I'm pretty sure he would step in at that point if he was.
He would absolutely would. But yeah, I just don't see us spending that sort of money on a young lad, Ash, because I think the board will still want to pay modest fees but then sell big. Whereas if they spend 10 million on this guy, it's harder to get a profit out of that, isn't it?
He is. He's going to have to be sensational. Now, again, we don't want to go down the road of for every player we sign, it has to then be turned into a profit. Because actually, if the guy comes for 4 years, wins us a barrel load of trophies, and leaves on a free, then I think everyone's waving him off into the sunset, saying thank you for your service. But I think predominantly this chap plays on the right wing, and so you then go back and you think, well, actually, if we're going to spend 10 million on a right winger, Czerny for 7.5 potentially might have been a more obvious choice. I don't know whether he fits in with Martin's style of play, but that would be a surer bet. I think most fans might be a little bit more comfortable with that. So I just don't think that we're going to go to those levels of transfers this particular summer. But then who knows, if we get the offer for Igaman and potentially for Raskin that we suspect might be in the offing, that maybe changes things and maybe we could go and take that risk. But everything I've seen about what they've done, the ownership group have done at Leeds, they're quite risk averse. They like to make astute signings rather than flashy ones that hit the high numbers.
Yeah, because at Leeds, they certainly sold I wouldn't say all their big players, but the vast majority of their big players, and then signed modest players, as you say. And, the fans were going absolutely off their heads, weren't they? Because they wasn't signing big players. And, it was, the Leeds fans were going really berserk. And then all of a sudden, the team clicked. They were playing well, and they won the league, and getting that promotion. So they've done this sort of thing before, where they sell big players and then bring in modest players, and then it works, doesn't it?
It does, and obviously when we were kind of in the throes of the takeover, I was doing all my little investigation. I think, the summer before last, the promotion, I think they sold 140 million pounds worth of players and only spent about 40 or something. Like it was, or certainly the 1 or 2 seasons when they first came in. And of course, fans were screaming about that because you're seeing all your great players go out the door. And even in January, I think this season, when Leeds kind of faltered a little bit in their promotion run, there was a lot of clamour around the club. We need to go into the market and we need to invest in big signings. And actually, the club held firm and they didn't splash a lot of money. They just refined, made a few tweaks here and there. And ultimately, they won the league. So that reassures me that they have a plan. It reassures me that they won't get caught up in all the emotional noise that we as fans have a right to get involved in. And it just makes me comfortable that we can trust. We've obviously got to have a year of them managing Rangers because it's a different kettle of fish. I think the Leeds experience will be good grounding for them. And they come in, I think, with a lot more trust and belief than perhaps other owners might have if they were coming in kind of green around the ears, for want of a better way to put it.
Very true, very true. And Mark is right with you, Ash. As you say, Ash, Czerny was one-dimensional, so I wouldn't be happy spending 7 million on him. I get that. His numbers was impressive, but as you say, Ash, you basically showed him the outside, and then that was him, wasn't it? But guys like Robin and Messi and them made a living off that, one-dimensional thing. Nobody could stop them. Certainly not comparing Czerny to them sort of players, but one-dimensional players have worked in the past because they're so good that nobody can stop them. But as I must admit, I'm with you in the sense that if he had any form of right foot on him, you would spend that money, but he just doesn't, does he?
No, and you can see it from the stands. Frustratingly, the defender would just wait inside for him to come in and we'd lose the ball or something, kind of frustrating like that. But that's not to say that he wasn't a fantastic player for us. I mean, great value I don't know what the financials were, but, I'm coming in for a season, as I say, he really was one of the few bright sparks that we had last year and what was pretty much a season to forget. But what I like about the wingers we're looking at now is the profile is different. They are going to offer something outside, inside, pace, being direct, comfortable moving the ball, ball carriers, etc. So, no, I think that I'm more comfortable with the profile we're looking at now. But then, as multiple man said earlier, the question will be when we get them in, can they, deal with the expectation of playing for us? And we have to hope that the recruitment team have done their due diligence in kind of checking that out.
Absolutely. Is a. Let me just find this. Stephen Robson, all the way from down under. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Take care. Absolutely. Good night. Yeah, I know. It's weird saying that at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, isn't it? Good night. But that'll be us, folks. That'll be us for this afternoon rabble. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the comments. And as Spanky is saying in the comments, thank you to all the Rabble Network for the best community there is. Well, thank you very much, Spanky. Much appreciated. I believe we'll be speaking to you soon. My thanks to Ash.
Thank you for having me on. And remember, everyone, get the sun cream out at the weekend, please, because I think it's not just Scotland that's going to get it, but we'll get it worse.
Yeah, I know, JD. I know, but we extended the show last night, so I didn't want the over. And then the afternoon rabbles are slightly shorter. They're meant to be just over the half hour. So, but much appreciated, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we'll speak very, very soon.